Hello, and welcome to Bible Gone Wild. This is the podcast that tells the stories from the Bible that others won't tell, and many don't want you to hear, because these Bible stories feature sex, violence, or are just plain weird. These wild stories vividly describe the darker side of human nature, so they are often graphic and disturbing. I will be telling them with all their gory details, so consider yourself warned. I'm calling today's episode Bible Gone Wild SVU because I'll be telling 3 stories from the Bible concerning sexual assault. I'll begin with the story of the rape of Dinah from the book of Genesis. It's one of a handful of stories in the Bible where the rape of a principal character drives the story. Then I'll tell the story about a crowd of men who attempt to gang rape 2 angels. Big mistake. Huge. Finally, I'll cap it off by telling another disturbing story about how 2 daughters technically raped their father. Gross. Now, I know that many people wish these stories of rape were not included in the Bible. Most of these folks are just uptight and they don't want to think about difficult subjects. Others don't like these stories because they just can't get over the fact that the ancient attitude toward rape is way different from our modern attitude. Personally, I have to give the Bible credit for telling these difficult stories because, if nothing else, these stories remind us that rape is a huge problem that humans have been dealing with for a long time. For today's first story, we are going way back in the Bible to the large family of Jacob. Remember, the 12 tribes of Israel were descended from Jacob's 12 sons. You may recall in our last episode we heard about Jacob's son Judah, and how Judah's 2 sons were both killed by God. And we heard about how Judah's daughter-in-law, Tamar, strangely, ended up giving birth to her father-in-law's children. Yeah, it was weird. This nutty family gets into more trouble this week in a story that features 3 of Jacob's other children, his 2 sons Levi and Simeon, and Jacob's only named daughter, Dinah. So here it is, the story of the rape of Dinah and its bloody aftermath. Other than having lots of brothers, we don't know much about Dinah. We know her mother was Leah, so Dinah had 6 full brothers and 6 half-brothers. We're also told that she was younger than all but 2 of those brothers. So the Bible mentions Dinah's birth, and then we don't hear about her again for many years, until her family moves back to the land of Canaan, which would later become Israel. Dinah's father, Jacob, makes a deal with a local bigwig to buy some land where his family could live. The land he buys is within sight of the bigwig's city, which is called Shechem. In a trope familiar to us today, it turns out the bigwig has a son who we will soon find out is a violent, entitled jerk. This isn't a big surprise, since the father either named his son after the city he ruled over or named the city after his son. So in a confusing detail in this story, the son and the city are both named Shechem. So keep that in mind. As Jacob's family is settling into their new home in Canaan, Dinah is in a neighborly mood and decides to go visit the ladies in Shechem who are her new neighbors. And while she's visiting Shechem, the town, Shechem, the violent, entitled jerk, sees Dinah, grabs her, and rapes her. And that's all the details we're going to get about that. You have to hand it to the Bible. It's not like many of the stories we see today about sexual assault, stories that seem to revel in telling all the little details. Dinah was raped. That's all we know. If you want a story that goes into excruciating detail about sexual assault, you'll just have to watch Law and Order. Now here comes a strange twist in the story. Shechem the rapist falls in love with Dinah, his victim, and the Bible says he spoke tenderly to her. Well, what a sweetheart this guy is. I may have misjudged him. Well, then, in what no doubt was thought a romantic gesture, he decides to keep Dinah as his prisoner. So now Shechem, the kidnapper, says to his father, "Get me this girl as my wife." That's what he says to his father. "Get me this girl as my wife." Is this guy a spoiled prick or what? He definitely had his father in the palm of his hand, because the dad immediately scurries off to negotiate a marriage for his son with the family of the woman his son just raped. As you might imagine, it does not go well. Jacob and his sons are shocked, and they're furious because Shechem has, quote, "done an outrageous thing, a thing that should not have been done," end quote. But Shechem's dad is persistent, and he's rich, and he makes Jacob and his sons a tempting offer. He says to them, "Let this be the first of many marriages among our people. Then you can stay here and you can trade and buy land and build some wealth of your own." Then Shechem the rapist chimed in, and he sweetened the offer by saying, "Name your price. I will pay anything to rape your sister. Marry your sister." The brothers were not interested in this offer, but they did see a tricky way to get some revenge, and maybe a big payout too. So they pretended to agree to the marriage, but they did have one condition. "Okay," Shechem and his dad said, "what's the condition? In order to marry our sister, you both and all the men of your city must be circumcised." And Shechem and his dad looked at each other, and they looked at the brothers, and they said, "That sounds great. We are definitely doing this." Okay, what? I can see Shechem doing this. Men have done less to get with a woman that they're, really into. But what is the father thinking? He's going to cut off his foreskin so that his son can marry this stranger? If you think this requires some suspension of disbelief, you ain't heard nothing yet. Because then Shechem and his dad went to the men of the city, and he met with them by the city gate because that's where all the important business was done back in the day. And Shechem's dad said to the men of the city, yeah, you guys know that big family that moved in within sight of the city? Well, we're working on an agreement with them where we can trade with them and we can marry their daughters and they can marry our daughters, but they have one condition." "Yeah," the men said. "Well, they want us all to cut off the foreskins of our penises." And the men of the city looked at each other and said, "Sounds great. Let's do that right now." Okay, does anyone else want to call bullshit at this point in the story? The only possible explanation is that Dinah has some smoking hot sisters who are so beautiful that even the chance of marrying them makes these guys willing to circumcise themselves. Well, this plot point may not make a lot of sense, but it does move the story along nicely. All the men were circumcised, and after 3 days, they were still not feeling too well. I'd imagine they were all moving kind of slow, and it's a pretty good bet that Shechem, the rapist, wasn't bothering Dinah during those 3 days. So it's at this moment, with all the city's men incapacitated, 2 of Dinah's brothers, Simeon and Levi, grabbed their swords, entered the city, and killed all the men, including Shechem and Shechem's father. They then grabbed Dinah and they headed back home again. When the rest of Dinah's brothers discovered that all the men of the city were killed, they were outraged and disappointed with their 2 brothers. No, they weren't. When they found out the men of Shechem were all dead, the other brothers were like, "Free stuff!" And they all ran into the city and they plundered it, taking all of the wealth, all of the herds, and all of the women and children captive. When the brothers finished their looting and slave gathering, they returned home to find that their dad, Jacob, was pissed. He was like, "You idiots. There are Canaanites all around us. When they hear what you've done, they're going to band together and they're going to kill every last one of us." And Levi and Simeon then said to their father, "Well, what were we supposed to do? Let this guy treat our sister like a prostitute?" Jacob didn't have a good answer for that one, But it wasn't long before he did move the family to a new town, away from anyone who might be upset about the people of Shechem, the town, being killed and plundered and enslaved and all. Okay, one thing you can't help but notice here is that the story of the rape of Dinah isn't really about Dinah. We don't hear much about her at all. She's raped, she's held hostage, then she's rescued. After being raped, she's moved to the farthest background of this story, leaving her brothers free to do their thing. This highlights one of the big differences between the modern thinking about rape and the ancient attitudes. In the old days, they thought the real victim of rape wasn't the woman who was raped. Wait, what? The victim was the woman's father, her brothers, or her husband. We can see this in the story when, as a rape victim, Dinah is repeatedly referred to by her family as being defiled, which really means spoiled. According to this ancient attitude, she had lost what value she had to her family as a virgin bride. Her brothers even compare her treatment to the way one would treat a prostitute, a comparison that doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. How is the victim of rape in any way like a prostitute? The cruel insinuation here is that the brothers have now changed their thinking about their sister. They now view her differently. She has gone from a person of value to a person of far less value. She has been spoiled. Eventually, this ancient attitude toward rape would be formalized in the laws of Moses with some strange results. For instance, according to the law, a rapist must pay the father of his victim 50 silver shekels, and get this, the rapist is obliged to marry his victim, and he can never divorce her. Okay, clearly these laws were not made with the woman's best interest in mind. Here's another strange twist in the laws regarding rape. According to the law, if a woman is raped in the city, not only is the rapist to be stoned to death, but also the victim of the rape is to be killed. But if a woman is raped in the country, only the rapist is killed. Apparently the thinking here is that in the city, the woman could have called out and gotten help from neighbors. So, since no one heard anything, she must not have called out, so she must have been into it, and that makes her as guilty as the man. The victim in the country, however, could have called out all she wanted, and chances are no one would have been around to hear her, so she would have been in the clear, and the rapist would have been killed. Okay, who can count all the logical fallacies in this reasoning? Well, fallacies or not, these laws regarding rape led to the strange conclusion that if you were going to be raped, it was better to be raped in the country. These ancient laws and stories about sexual assault are powerful reminders of how far we have come in our thinking on this issue, but they also remind us that we still have a long way to go. Okay, that's the story of Dinah. But what about times when men are raped? Does the Bible deal with that? Yes. In fact, the story of a fellow named Lot deals with two separate situations where men are either the victims or the intended victims of rape. In the story, we're going even further back in time to those two wild cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. We began today with the story of Jacob's daughter, Dinah. But for this story, we're going back in time to Jacob's grandfather, Abraham. But this is a story that's really about Abraham's cousin, a man named Lot. Most people who are aware of Lot remember him because his wife was turned into a pillar of salt. What most people don't remember is that Lot was kind of a doofus. You see, he made a couple of bad decisions in his life that led him to settle in the city of Sodom right as God was deciding to destroy it. But Lot's cousin Abraham had God's ear, and he had his cousin's back. So Abraham negotiated with God to save Sodom. Abraham said to God, "Hey God, you're not going to kill all the good people in Sodom along with all the bad people, are you? That wouldn't be cool." And God said, "Okay, listen. If there are 50 good people in Sodom, I won't destroy it." Abraham then negotiates with God and eventually gets him down to just 10 people. If 10 righteous people can be found in Sodom, God agrees he won't destroy the city. So God sends 2 angels down to Sodom, disguised as men, to check things out and see if they can find 10 righteous men so that God could spare the city. So it just so happened that Abraham's cousin Lot was sitting by the city gate, and he saw the 2 angels, disguised as men, enter the city. Not knowing who they were or why they were there, he still greets them warmly and offers to host them in his home for the night, and the 2 men politely refuse, saying, yeah, they were going to sleep in the square that night. But Lot wouldn't take no for an answer. He insisted that the strangers eat with him and spend the night in his home. The story is clear. Lot may have been a doofus, but he was also a generous and welcoming host. So Lot and his family welcomed these strangers, and together they enjoyed a nice meal. But then after dinner, events took a strange turn. A crowd of men from the city surrounded Lot's house and called out to Lot, demanding that he send out the 2 strangers so that they could gang rape them. We're told at this point that all the men of the city were there, young and old, so it looks like the question of whether there are 10 righteous men in Sodom has now been answered. Actually, they're all just a bunch of rapists. In this moment of crisis, Lot keeps his head, and he remains the ultimate example of what in that day would have been considered a great host. He went outside to talk to the men. Making a point of shutting the door behind him after he stepped out, he said to the men of the crowd, "Please don't do this. These men are my guests. I am responsible for their safety." Okay, he's doing good so far, but here is where, for the modern listener, he goes completely off the rails. He says to them, "Let me make you an offer. I have 2 daughters who are virgins. I'll send them out, and you can gang rape them instead." There's our bell, which can only mean that Lot, in offering his daughters to a group of rapists, has won our Dick of the Episode award. Congratulations, Lot. You deserve it. Well, there's no doubt that Lot crosses a big line here, and we can't ignore the underlying assumption that's there in his offer. You know, that it's not okay to rape 2 men, but it's okay to rape 2 women, or, who are we kidding, 2 girls. Lot's 2 daughters, no doubt listening from inside the house, must have breathed a sigh of relief when the men of the city refused Lot's offer. Here's a big surprise. The rapists didn't like Lot telling them what to do, and so they threatened to rape him too, and they started to press in to get to the door to get inside the house. The angels in the house had now had enough of this shit. They opened the door, pulled Lot back inside, and slammed the door shut. Then the angels let out a great light and blinded the men outside, which we assume left the mob stumbling helpless in the darkness. Having saved Lot from the mob of rapists, the angels said to him, "To hell with these guys, to hell with this place, we are torching this messed up town, so get your family and get out." So as Lot and his family ran away, Sodom and Gomorrah were both destroyed by fire and brimstone raining down from the sky. Which goes to show you, trying to gang rape 2 angels is not going to end well for you, your buddies, your family, or your city. But Lot and his family were saved. Well, all but Lot's wife, who looked back at the destruction after being told that was a no-no and was weirdly turned into a pillar of salt. Many people who have given this story some thought point out that it's not really about rape or about homosexuality. This story is about hospitality, with Lot being the perfect host, willing even to sacrifice his own daughters to save his guests. Yuck. Then, on the other hand, there are the men of Sodom, who are perfectly inhospitable, if we can agree that gang rape is pretty much the most uncool thing you can do to a guest. So the sin of Sodom isn't homosexuality, and it isn't even rape. It's the sin of being cruelly inhospitable to strangers. But it's hard to get around another implied lesson here, that a father can offer up his daughters to be raped and still be considered worthy to be saved, but if you try to rape 2 men, you're going to be utterly destroyed. Okay, There is a sad and disturbing little ending to the story of Lot and his daughters. After the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, they are living in a cave, because for some reason, Lot absolutely is unwilling to leave this now desolate valley where Sodom and Gomorrah once stood. I told you he was a bit of a doofus. So his daughters start getting desperate. They know they aren't likely to find a husband while living in a cave in a cursed land. And because everyone in the Bible seems to base a woman's worth on whether she can bear a male child, Lot's daughters decide to sleep with the only man available, their father, and bear his children. Yeah, I know. Double yuck. So over the course of 2 nights, the girls get their father drunk. So drunk he doesn't remember any of this. In effect, they roofie him. And then they have sex with him, or technically, rape him. Eventually, each of them bears a son, and they name the boys Moab and Ben-Ammi. And from these 2 children, it is said, are descended all of the Moabites and Ammonites, the people living in the 2 countries that border Israel and who, by the way, the Hebrew people don't like. Remember Fat King Eglon from episode 1, the guy who pooped on the floor? He was the king of the Moabites. The point of this story is pretty clear. Not only did it wrap up the story of Lot and his daughters nicely, it gave the Hebrew people a satisfying origin story explaining where those despised Moabites and Ammonites came from. Yes, of course, the Israelites said. They are the results of incestuous rape. We should have guessed.
I can't get you off my mind. It don't matter how hard I try to forget.
Concluding this episode is a short story from the life of Jacob. You remember the father of Dinah and her 12 brothers. This story concerns a time when Jacob got into a wrestling match with a stranger in the wilderness. It begins with Jacob and his family camped at a stream as they travel through the wilderness. It's nighttime when a strange man enters the camp, grabs Jacob, and starts wrestling with him. And then they end up wrestling all night, neither winning and neither willing to give up. Finally, the attacker touches Jacob's hip, and with that touch, dislocates his hip. Ouch. But Jacob still won't let go, because he's discovered something amazing. This attacker is actually God. Okay, what is it with God? In our last episode, he was attacking Moses in the wilderness, and this week it's Jacob. Well, in the course of their struggle, God says to Jacob, "Let me go, because the night is over and the day has come." I'm not sure why God can't wrestle during the day. So Jacob tells God he won't let him go until God blesses him. So God blessed Jacob, and he gives him a new name. He calls Jacob Israel, which means he wrestles with God. So that's where that comes from. The story ends with Jacob limping away on his bum hip, having wrestled with God and having been given this cool and obviously important new name. Well, that's it for today. I hope you'll join me for our next episode when we'll be looking at a couple of the stories in the Bible concerning animal cruelty, which means I finally get to tell the story of the talking donkey. This is one of the weirdest stories in the Bible, and it includes sex and violence, so please join me for this next episode. Our theme music is from the song Parasite by Lamprey. Other music in this episode is by the group Pachyderm from their self-titled LP. If you want more information on this podcast, you can find it on Bible Gone Wild on Twitter and at BibleGoneWild.com, where you'll find show notes for each episode. There's also a Bible Gone Wild Patreon page if you'd like to throw a few shekels my way. So I do hope you'll join me next time for Bible stories about animal cruelty. But until then, don't forget, from time to time we all need to go a little wild.